Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Angel Has Fallen. So, I've gone on and reviewed now Olympus, now in London, and now we have Angel. We, of course, have it where Mike is to now be kind of the guy who's being framed, which, come on, like, we've seen we've personally seen Trumbull consistently know how Mike has gone and saved a number of people through a number of films. Do you really believe that he's going to turn against his country now? After he's gone on and done all of that? Like, this guy is so absurdly loyal, and they're saying that he isn't. Makes no sense. But we really just have to have this like fugitive kind of moment with Mike, where eventually he has to re-earn the trust back to his own government to fight up against this threat that isn't obviously all that hard to figure it out. But we have some interesting kind of dialogue here, that kind of feels also like it's copied and pasted from something, where we kind of have Wade who's kind of giving us that whole lion speech. And of course, you guys have ever seen League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, we end up getting the real kind of lions when they are nearing their end is when they're most fierce. Like, that's where the lions thing is really going at here. And they just didn't want to basically just rip off that same line. We also have like certain stuff that just kind of feels like stealing stuff. Like, if you watch Iron Man 3 and then you watch this movie, you're like, yeah, kind of the same story here. Like, kind of it has the same feel and approach and whichever. But anyways, yeah, I think that's all that I really have to say for this one. There's some interesting things that it expands upon the Mike's universe, family, whichever, in this film, where all of a sudden we just get a dad out of nowhere. And also that dad is just a really crazy man that is to go on and take years out of his life to figure out that somebody's just coming to get him, like some weird paranoia of a man that this guy becomes. But it ends up factoring into a really cool action sequence of things to come. So, with that said, yeah, just a lot of explosions and a lot of cool things happening in this movie, because they have to try to jam pack it with action stuff, or just these interesting scenarios, which we eventually find out are to just be these odd, visually cool looking things where they can heavily cut as much as they can. But yeah, like, it's kind of funny how, like, supposedly Mike is to be this guy who is to go on and of course be out there free as a bird and whatever. And it seems that they made no plans for figuring out if Mike is going to try to go after the president. It seems like they let him just kind of sneak in to where he needs to sneak into. And, like, so basically Mike has to always outthink these people because he knows their strategy. So anyways, with that said, let's just go into the double five timed territory, and let's just get this one reviewed. Because really, the teeing up of it, there isn't much for me to really be left to tee up, because anything else would just be giving this movie away easily at this point. So with that said, I think the only thing that I can say is Mike is to go on and is to have some friends and some dads and some uh, stories that lead us to eventually coming up with the villain of this story. Kind of almost in a very live free or die hard kind of fashion at some points, because there's some kind of tech savvy villains in this where they're just kind of in this office somewhere, just kind of computering away at some point. But with that said, it's about that time to let's just go into that Kraken double five. It's otherwise about that time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. That was a weird one time off mess up of that. Where could you go out of your way to see this movie? What is the grading of this film? I would say that this movie, of course, is it has to forcibly be weaker than the other two, just because it's a smaller. It feels like a smaller film, uh, and plus, really, it gives us a story that isn't as good as a payout as the either one of the other Has Fallen movies. So I would say that this movie has to be a very like soft, okay film. It gives us a ton of action, and it gives us a story that we can just go about, and so really it's just like a okay film. Uh, because of the action part, I think it kind of the one that saves this movie is just its action and that really we've this is the third installment and thinking they're going to probably make another one at some point. I'd like that'd be great, but hopefully they have a bigger budget. Hopefully they do something bigger with this story if they are going to, or otherwise what's the point? So more than likely there isn't a convenient way to say that you've seen this movie. I would go and say Google search certain apps, like go through movie apps and search that through a Google store and probably find a number of apps you can conveniently see any number of films. But I would have you Google search an app called Letter C Movies. So a letter and a word, and you should be able to download that app and be able to see anything. You could go on to also probably an Amazon or some kind of something. Probably rent this movie if that's what you really want to do, or buy it, whatever you want to do, because maybe you love the Has Fallen movies, because Gerard Butler is to go on and, of course, tell us with his GQ interview that it seemed a lot of people, like he has everyone tell him that the Has Fallen movies was something that they all loved. His GQ most iconic thing, or iconic characters. Evidently, the Has Fallen series was like something everybody was saying, like, yeah, like Has Fallen. He's like, yeah, I love people that are telling me that they love that series for whatever reason. So you can also Google search Fox HD Movies. The logo will say so, but the title will say something different for that app. It'll be 1080p or play 1080p HD movies, something or other, something like that. But the logo will say Fox HD Movies. You can Google search that and find that app, and you'll be able to download it. With a combination of those two apps, with maybe a Google Play Store or TV Crush, you should be able to roughly be able to see whatever you want at that point once you download those apps. I know it's a weird, goofy thing to approach, and it might be inconvenient for you or whatever, but it's a free way for you to be able to say you can watch almost anything. And plus, I've used those apps fairly reliably for a very long time. So let's go into a bind of spoilers, everybody. So what is this movie really about? Well, it's not a very it's not a very complex story, but it's a jumbled all over the place gosh darn story. So let's get into it. So the beginning of this movie weirdly has a bunch of people all wearing the same outfits. So if you don't get confused by the very beginning of this film, you're not watching it very well. So Mike all of a sudden is wearing the exact same clothes as his enemy, immediately telling us that this is to be some weird, bizarre training exercise. Because why is Mike wearing the exact same clothes as everyone else? It makes no sense. So all of a sudden, Mike is going through this training exercise to all of a sudden get shot by Wade at the end of it, because Mike is to never really get out of a training exercise without getting shot somehow, somewhere. So we end up, of course, having one guy who is to come out of there because he had fell down the flight of stairs because Mike had pushed him down there, who is just kind of upset that he, of course, was to be pushed down these flight of stairs. And we have Mike going on and telling him, hey, if you train like it's real, or if you don't train like it's real, you'll die when it's real. So we go on and we of course have we of course go and have Wade mentioning here that he went and bought a 5,000 acre Disneyland, and we also have Mike going on and saying like, well, yeah, like I would buy a house, but you bought a part of land in Virginia. So we, of course, desperately have it where Wade is consistently asking Mike for him to, of course, ask for them to, like, send all their Secret Service guys to train there. Like, they can go and do any number of things here, and Wade is desperately hoping that this contract with the Secret Service would get him in the red, so that way he can make a lot of money out of this land. And really, since Wade is to realize that David, who of course is to be the director of the Secret Service, is going to retire soon, that maybe Mike might be able to get that position. And we of course have Mike telling, of course, Wade here, it's like, well, like, I don't know if I'm going to take that position, but if whoever does take it, I'm going to recommend this spot to them. Like, believe me, I'll recommend it. And we consistently have that, like, coming back for that to continue to be mentioned. So we end up having Mike, of course, who is to have Wade come to his home, so that way they can have dinner together. So Mike, of course, is to go home, and once he is to get into his car, he's immediately popping pills. And so he ends up going home, and he is to meet a new variation of wife, who, of course, is to be the new Leia, or the new Leia, the new wife. It seems like weirdly they ended up getting a different wife this time around, but it seems like she has a much more role in this movie than she did in the other film. So maybe whoever did this, whoever the girl was before, like maybe it's just like, hey man, like you guys are taking too much time. This isn't enough money. Blah 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 blah. Like, so maybe they just got a smaller. Maybe they just got another person that would just take a cut and pay for whatever reason. I don't know. So we go on here, and we of course have Wade go and have dinner with them, and so we have this whole story about Wade going on about this guy who is to make this like the best fried chicken. and this is when Mike was in the military. And so Mike ended up buying a car for that guy because he was to make the best fried chicken, and this guy was Mo. For some odd reason, Mike was like, "Hey man, you did make the best fried chicken. Here's a car. Here you go." Sure, okay. What a goofy story. So eventually we end up having Mike, who's going to these doctor visits, paying in cash. And so we have these doctors saying that Mike's condition is to eventually one false move, and Mike can really just forget like his whole job. And like we have Mike, who's just kind of falsely saying that he's some kind of computer programmer or some goofy thing, and that some car accident had caused this concussion of his. And so we have this doctor who's telling him, it's like, hey man, like you getting insomnia and you having all these problems, like man, you're just a hair trigger away. So we transition here, and we of course have the president, who is going and doing a press conference, and all of a sudden they are talking to him about these private contractors, which we'll see that kind of like that's the theme of this movie, is like a private contractor, where kind of Wade's outfit is a private contractor. So we're just going to consistently see like private contractors being a theme of this thing. So we go on, and we of course have Wade, who is to make it back to speak with his wife. And so I think her name is Lee. Like, I think it's Lee. Doesn't look that way, but I think it's Lee. It's been a while. So it's been a while since I've gone back into the series. So Mike is leaving for work, and Lee is mentioning to Mike, it's like, well, hey, like, I know that you didn't sleep the night before, so, like, you should just stay home. You should just call off sick. So Mike is like, no, I'm fine. Like, I'll go to work. So we end up having the president, after this the press conference, is going to his people and saying like, okay, who's talking, who's squealing. And so we end up having Vice President Kirby here, who's going and mentioning about like fighting for the flag here, and that nobody should be like, we have this guy alone who's wanting to, of course, uh, like say like, hey guys, like come on, like you of all people, like trying to make it look like he's like the goody two shoes, and someone else is to be the kind of the bad, the odd guy out here, to just make it seem like he's not going to be the villain of this story is a big massive surprise to any of us possibly. So we go on, and we of course have them reiterate about private contracting and whatever. So we'll push on here. So we have Morgan Freeman. We have Trumbull here, who ends up going on to his fishing outing. And of course, we have Mike kind of complaining about how cold it is. Of course, during this whole the president fishing thing. So we go on, and of course, we have kind of Mike kind of putzing around about the whole director thing, and we had the president going on. It's like, well, you know what, Mike? Like, I think you would be the perfect candidate for that director's job. And he's like, I think you're going to be the guy. Mike all of a sudden looks kind of oddly at the president. The president's like, well, Why is it that you're looking at me as if you're getting a death sentence? And Mike is like, well, that whole thing is great and all, but like, I don't know, like it would be a great kind of thing, kind of much more money coming in and so on and so forth. But like Mike just consistently wants to keep on fighting, and that's the one thing that he ended up talking to Wade about, and that's what he's reiterating here. That he's like, you know what, I just want to keep on going. And by the time Mike all of a sudden is to say that he's going to keep on going, all of a sudden he falls over, and Trumbull here is like, "Oh my God, Mike, are you okay?" And so Mike ends up going and swapping out with another agent, I guess, so that way he can get some sleep. So all of a sudden, while this is going on, we all of a sudden have these drones being launched out of this one uh, thing where all these multiple drones are all being sent out. I'm like, okay, here we go. Like, we now have a load of movies that all has to be like drones. Like, that's the new thing now. Like, I've seen so many futuristic movies at this point that is to, of course, have some kind of drone attached to them for one reason or another. Like, heaven forbid I can remember any of the name of the number of the movies that have had a drone attached to them because they weren't all that great. But still, like, it seems when there's ever a sci-fi movie, there's going to be some kind of drone somewhere. So we go on here, and we of course have Mike, who is to curve his boat around and is now trying to protect the president and shoot down these drones. We have a bunch of guys, of course, who are all getting blown up by these drones because they're all attacking them. Because once they are to ID them, they start going after and attacking them like a GPS tracker of sorts because of their face. So we end up having it to where when Mike is to make it to the president's boat, he ends up grabbing the president and both of them jump into the water. And so Mike is telling him, the president, to dunk underwater while the drones are to crash in the water trying to explode and kill both of them. So all of a sudden we end up having the president, who is oddly in a coma in a hospital somewhere, and Mike is now being cuffed to some bed because conveniently we end up having, of course, uh, Agent Thompson, who is to find a bunch of evidence piling up to say that Mike Bennett could have possibly been in cahoots with these people, and I guess these people are working with the Russians, supposedly. So we go in, and once we have Mike who wakes up, uh, we have kind of Mike asking about things. We have Lee, who is to come in desperately wanting to ask where Mike is, and David, of course, the guy who is to be uh, the guy retiring soon, the director. He is to go on and tell Lee, like, well, like, we have him in a certain room, and that's all I can tell you right now. So we go on and we have Agent Thompson, who is going and asking Mike about how it's coincidentally that Mike is the only one alive out of here, and there's a purpose for that because the drones had looked at Mike's face and aborted their mission. So, because they wanted to tie him to everything. Supposedly, Mike had been wired $10 million to supposedly assassinate the president, and there is a lot of evidence of like fingerprints and hair samples and stuff like that by the equipment of the villainish characters, because of course, because he went on to go into their training scenario where of course they were to get, of course, numbers of samples, because him running and gunning around, yeah, they're gonna eventually find something. So we go on here, and of course we have Mike, who quickly just gets arrested, and is to be transferred to some jail, prison somewhere. And so, of course, we also have Agent Thompson, who is asking Mike's wife questions about all these about all this stuff that had happened to him. She's also mentioning, of course, the real legitimate thing about Mike funding all these doctors to go and get all these prescriptions and so on and so forth. And so his wife knew nothing about that, of course. So, but Mike's wife isn't going to tell them anything because F that. Like, they're basically going on and saying, like, she's saying, like, well, I'm not going to turn on my husband. No, you guys, like, he's the good guy. So Mike is going on, waiting to eventually just make it to this prison, hopefully to... Like, did they even give him a trial? Did they give him a chance to put on any kind of defense of any kind? No, they just arrested him and just like, hey, shall we go to jail? So Mike all of a sudden is being transported out, and we, of course, quickly have given him prison fatigues for whatever reason. And so all of a sudden we, of course, have Wade's men who go after Mike to try to retrieve him, because they want to make sure that they have Mike, because they still have to go after the president. So it makes a lot of sense to have kind of Mike with them, so that way they can go on and have Mike eventually kill the president at some later date. But instead, Mike is to go on and get out of this whole situation and go on to shoot all of these guys. And he is to unmask Wade's men to find out they are Wade's men. And he, of course, is the one guy that he talked to before when he pushed him down that flight of stairs. And he told him, like, yeah, you should have trained like it was real, because I freaking killed you now. So we go on and we have, of course, Mike going on and putting on these guys' clothing so that way he can run off and have no one be the wiser. And so the news is kind of covering all over the place that Mike is to be the world's most wanted man, or really that Mike had gone on to go against the president and try to assassinate him, and all this kind of information that they could go out and leak out to the press is what they really did. So we, of course, have Wade, who is going and talking to the mysterious villain of this movie. And we, of course, have Mike just being really a loose end here. And the real thing here is that Mike being a loose end could eventually backfire for them, for Mike to go on and try to clear his name. And that's basically what he goes on and tries to do, because Trumbull, of course, is to believe Mike that he didn't do any of this. So we go on and we have Mike, who is to be at a payphone, because luckily there's still stuff like that out there now. And he ends up calling his wife, and he's to kind of relay what's going on. All of a sudden we have these two rednecks in these kind of both similar shirts, clothing, whatever, that go on and I guess just toss guns onto anybody, because all of a sudden when Gerard Butler's character Mike turns around, they're like, oh, this is America's Most Wanted. So like they had no clue who this guy was, so do they just like thrust their guns onto anybody? That is so bizarre. So when Mike goes and disarms one guy, all of a sudden a trucker is to bust out and whip out his gun. I'm like, man, just anybody could just whip out a gun in this film. Good grief. So we all of a sudden have Mike notice that this guy is like, "Hey man, do you have the keys for that truck?" And so Mike is to go on to take a truck and is to drive this truck all of a sudden to have a number of people chasing after him. And so Mike is to go and kind of crash this truck. And so he ends up going on and finding, luckily, I guess nearby, a place of which that his father Clay is to, of course, be living in or living at, because I guess this guy has completely taken himself off the grid, and so Clay, of course, is to go on and now turn a gun on his son, not realizing that it is Mike at first, and so Mike is to go on and tell his father that he knew where he has been all along, because of course he can know where he's been, because he's working with the Secret Service. There isn't any secret, or there isn't anything that that Mike doesn't know about if he wants to know about it. So Mike has technically been keeping tabs on Clay, and we end up having Wade that also is to figure out that that Mike, of course, is to be living with Clay, because of course they end up tracking down his father's social security number and going on to realize, like, oh, okay, like, yeah, like his dad is ex-military, and that he has gone on to live at this one little shack for a number of years, blah, 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 blah. So we go on and we have Mike, who is to ask, of course, his father for any aspirin or anything stronger. And so we, of course, have Clay, who's to mention as really Mike is to mention about his father walking out on him and his mother. And so Clay is to mention that Clay walking out on them was probably the best thing that he could ever have done for both of them, because he was in the right mind for things. Like, war is always war, and you just kind of compound that. And this guy, like, just, I guess, turned crazy at some point and just had to leave, had to go. So, and really, Clay can kind of see that in Mike right now, how he's just been in too many wars, and like now he like has insomnia, and like there's a lot of side effects, some PTSD probably, simply because all the stuff he had been through since the other couple of movies. So we go on, and so we eventually have it where when Mike is to go and finally fall asleep and get some shut-eye for a couple hours, we all of a sudden have Wade's men kind of surrounding this compound of Clay's. So what ends up happening is both Clay and Mike are to sneak around to go into this one underground place that Mike is to keep with him here. And so Mike is like, oh my god, like, you have created this whole underground thing going on here. Like, wow. So eventually Mike and Clay are eventually making it to one spot where they are just surrounded by all these explosives, so much so that we just consistently see Clay just firing these things up, these bad boys off, when anyone is to be surrounding them. And so we have at one point where Mike is trying to put up a decent kind of defense against these guys, and but Clay still has these explosives. So he's like, man, I almost got blown up. Like, I don't know how many times. And Clay is just like, nah, whatever. Like, hey, like, I overly planned for all this. So we go on and we have now Mike having to push one of these triggers to light off another explosion. So we now transition to have finally, after the president or the vice president has been sworn in, and the vice president is saying like, well, hopefully all this is just a formality, as he is to be sworn in by some judge of Pennsylvania. I want to say it's either Pennsylvania or New Hampshire. I'm thinking that it's Pennsylvania. Not quite sure. It's a judge of some sort. So we go on and we now have the president who is to start to wake up from his coma, and that they're saying it seems like he's showing some kind of responses that he's going to fully wake up soon. So we go on here, and of course we have Mike taking every single one of the bodies of the villainous guys and stacking them all by the front of this cabin, and he ends up going and putting a finger to one of these guys' phones, and is to call Wade. And so Wade is mentioning to Mike that's like, hey, I should have sent more men. And Mike is just like, well, like God, like, so, like, you're the villain of the story. Technically, you're the bad guy of this story. That's like the whole thing that we get to here. So we go on and of course have Clay, who's kind of yelling through the phone, and we have Wade, who's telling Mike, it's like, oh, I must have got your dad fired up. It's like, well, yeah, like, speaking of fire, he lit up a lot of your guys. So we go on and we have the good guy, bad guy talk here in this phone, blah, 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 blah. Let's transition. So Agent Thompson is to eventually get a longitude, latitude thing from Mike via another satellite. So we have another satellite thing that randomly is to pick up Mike, I guess. I don't know why they do these satellite things in this movie, because it, like, at least it doesn't seem that, like, unreasonable compared to another movie where you end up having them like, hey man, satellite, all of a sudden he's giving us some code. He gives us some, like, fingered numbered code. Oh, it must be SEAL Team 6. Oh, we figured it out. Oh man, like, that was unbelievable. This one is much more like, there seems to be a reasonable thing with this. So we now have the FBI with Agent Thompson going on to this cabin to go and find a company, Salient, because there, of course, is to be a sign that says we work for Salient. So we go on and we have, of course, these FBI guys trying to figure out and put these pieces together, because Agent Thompson was to go and investigate Wade's company once before to kind of check on things when I guess she was in Iraq at some point. Me double questioning that because there's a lot of in this movie. So, but we go on and we, of course, have both Mike and Clay, who of course still has this old car of theirs that Mike is now asking. It's like, well, hey, is the engine still in it? Does it still work? And so they both go on this joyride to make it out of there, so that way they can go on to have Mike possibly steal a car. And so Clay is to go off to try and save, of course, Mike's wife from possibly getting killed, because all of a sudden there's a bunch of people from Wade's company that are to sneak from the backyard to try to get to Mike's wife, and Clay ends up saving her just in the nick of time. And so now Mike's wife is, of course, asking Clay, it's like, well, how do I know that you're his dad? Because he never really mentioned you before. So Clay goes on this big, massive rant about, of course, Mike's mother's maiden name and all this goofy information that is to seem all like somebody could have probably Googled this. And it doesn't seem all of that like legitimate, but we just have it to where, of course, Mike's wife buys this anyways. And it's like, you know what, how about we put a like that wound looks pretty deep. Let's go and let's bandage that wound. So, and kind of Clay is like regretting how exactly this is how they're going to meet here. So we go on and, of course, finally reveal that Vice President Kirby, of course, is to be the villain of the story as he's going on and now talking to Wade, and we actually see the kind of the God, what is it, the weird voice changer thing, and the person who's talking is one and the same now, and it's actually Vice President Kirby. So so we go on here, and we, of course, have it where Agent Thompson is to go on to Wade's company, and is to try to search for answers. But by the time her and her partner get out of their helicopter to go and talk to Wade, they end up getting shot up by Wade. Eventually, and the guy in the helicopter gets shot up. Thompson gets shot up. I think her partner, I think, is Rodriguez, but don't quote me on that because I'm probably sure I'm wrong about that. Because heaven forbid. I'm not going to take the time to find that. So we go on here, and of course, Thompson is now dead, sadly. And so now David is going and talking to Trumbull and kind of giving him an update about what's going on here. And we, of course, have the president going on and saying here that Mike was by me saving my life. And so there's no way in heck that the president here is thinking that Mike is really just going to be the one to be the villain here. It makes no rational sense. And so Mike then goes on and is to make it to this hospital so that way he can turn himself in. He goes into the one wing of the hospital after going and making a false gunman radio to all these guys. Of course, forcibly having them go to a certain direction, which he is not going to eventually have this one elevator be kind of occupied by this one guy. And so Mike is to go on, and I think this guy's name is Billy, and put a gun on him, force him to go into the elevator with him, so that way he can basically turn himself in to David personally, and then have both him and Mike go to the president, because Mike wants to, or that President Trumbull wants to hear Mike personally, just kind of to see him, because again, the president still trusts Mike. So we, of course, have President Trumbull having Mike uncuffed here, because we have, of course, Mike saying it's like, well, hey, the president is not safe here. We eventually have to come up with an evac, because, like, there's, like, Wade is coming for you. Like, if you are not dead, he's going to try to make you dead. So, like, we need to get you out of here. Like, he's coming for you. So, we go on and we have Mike and we have David who are just kind of waiting things out. And all of a sudden, we have where they're at conveniently. We have some nurse mentioning that these computers had crashed numerous times. And I think it's down to weirdly the sixth time that this computer has crashed. Luckily, I guess this is to be conveniently said for Mike to just kind of get very odd about it and go on and ask if this system has been hacked somewhere by Wade's company. All of a sudden, realizing that they had figured it out, that there is to be some uh, certain gases and certain chemical or certain gases of some sorts being mixed into this building, and so all of a sudden they realize that there is to be a part of this building that is releasing these gases, and no matter what they'll do, this place will explode soon. And so they now have to evac this building, getting of course the president into a wheelchair so they can haul his ass out of there. So we now go on and we have the vice president who is, of course, going on and trying to have certain ops being put in place so that way he can go to war with Russia. We at one point had the president who found out that the vice president is getting ready to go to war with Russia, and the president was asking to get his number on the line so that way he can tell him not to. The vice president is going on and talking to all these executives and saying, like, well, hey, I technically have power right now, so you guys get these ops in place. So I can do this. So because he desperately just wants to go to war right now with Russia for some odd reason. I guess to create World War IV at some point, or World War III. Yeah, World War III. What am I saying? So we of course go on and have them scrambling to evacuate the president, and so they end up having a very unconspicuous vehicle that the president is to go into, and so it seems that there's only two bulletproof vests, and so Mike, of course, is to give his bulletproof vest to the president, because F anybody else getting this, right? So we go on, we have Mike going on here, and we have, of course, Wade coming in to stop Mike from leaving this area, because they, of course, want this building to blow up with the president being somewhere around it. So all of a sudden we have Mike, who is now making his last stand by this vehicle, pushing the president to be like at a safe place. But Mike is going to go on and grab the president and take him to another building adjacent, or like close to where they are, let's just say. So we of course have Mike telling Trumbull that at some point they're going to run to this other building and some people will fall, but he won't. So, like, just kind of keep going on. All of a sudden, Trumbull is to realize one of these agents is going down, and he, like, yells for him, but Mike is like, no, 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 President, like, let's keep going, so that way you don't get shot. Because Wade is to be going and getting a sniper scope to shoot out the president, and all of a sudden one of these agents get in the way. So we end up going into this other building where there's a bunch of guys trying to prevent the president being shot here. A bunch of these guys in these heavily weld SEAL team suits and whatever. So we, of course, have Mike going and having it be that they're presenting this one last stand for, of course, the president to be in some room with David, and these guys are going to cement this one last stand here for them to hold out as long as possible to take down Wade's group. So we go on and uh, we have Mike here telling this team that he's going to go and try to have these guys not flank them, and he's going to go through and be where they're not to just kind of slice and dice his way through these guys and kind of help them. So we rarely have it to where Mike is to be the only one that's kind of doing this, and all these other guys are just kind of standing their ground in one single area, not moving around all that often. Even though Wade's team is kind of all over the place. So we end up having Mike here, who is going and killing a lot more people than any of these other kind of SEAL team guys, whoever they are, kind of guys in the black. They're helping out the president. So we end up having Wade's guys eventually go through all of these guys that are with Mike, just kind of murdering them, killing them horrifically. They go on to go in the room that is supposedly to have the president, to find out that he's not actually there. That we, of course, have Mike. We, of course, have Wade make the comment about, of course, in war, there's always deception. And, I think I like that. That whole way of approaching things, where you would think that the president would have to be in this one room because they're heavily guarding it, but he's actually not. I think it's kind of weird, though, that they have him the very next room. I would have liked it to much rather him be in, the very bottom floor, because they would have thought that he would have been on the very top floor. I don't know, that's just me. So we go on here, and since Wade's numbers are starting to dwindle down here, we end up just having Wade just go to the roof to go and get a helicopter transport, because they can't figure out where the president is now. So all of a sudden we end up having, of course, Wade trying to make it to this helicopter. All of a sudden the helicopter explodes, because Mike has to have this ability to have this one kind of weapon that is to create this massive explosion, and then he drops the gun because I guess conveniently there isn't any more bullets in this gun, weirdly. I guess it was just a one-off thing. So now, of course, we have both Wade and Mike, who has to make this big, massive last stand going on here. We also had the moment where Mike was trying to chase after Wade, and there was to be a grenade that went down the stairs, and Mike had to go and push this body on top of it, and he had to get knocked back. So we go on and, of course, have Wade, who's fighting Mike now, and it's kind of a hand-to-hand kind of deal, because eventually Mike has run out of bullets, and then Mike has to disarm Wade. So now we have kind of a knife fight going on here, where eventually we have Mike, who stabs Wade in the side of the chest, and so he's, of course, bleeding out. We, of course, have Wade, who goes on and tells him, it's well, you know what, I'm glad it was you. And, we just consistently have it to where, we're lions. Back to that same old quote that, of course, Wade is to give here. So we go on, and after the success of this mission, we have Trumbull going on and being shoulder to shoulder, of course, with the with vice presidents and Putin and all this other stuff, all this jazz, whatever. So we go on and, of course, turn around and have the president, who, of course, is to let the vice president know. It's hey, I know what you did. And Agent Thompson is to have all the evidence pointing at you, saying that you were the one who had orchestrated all this. So, you're going to go to jail for a long time. And guess what? The former director, David, who is to have his last day here, is going to haul your ASS out of here. With him being in crutches, of course. So now we end up having, of course, having a little talk between both Mike and Trumbull about what is to really be left for Mike here for his duties as him being, of course, with the Secret Service. So Mike, of course, is saying it's like, well, hey, like, I'm sorry about all the secrets and the back alley deals that I was doing with all these doctors and so on and so forth. And the president is just like, well, yeah, with everything that we've like been through, like, how can you not tell me everything? And so we go on, and we of course have Mike, who's resigning here, and really the president is just like, well, hey, like, you didn't quit on me before, so like, if anything, whether you resign from this position or not, I still want you for the director. Either way, I won't have you like I won't have it without you like being here, because like this guy has gone through so many of these freaking films at this point. Like this guy better have a high position whether he wants it or not, because good God, like he's the only guy out of a number of people that survived through all of this. Like, how is it he is just better than everybody at all this? So he's got to be like the guy that has to have like a really good position, a really sweet job at the end of all this. So we have both Mike and the president just kind of hugging it out because they just been through a lot, and plus also like Mike saved the president's life for I don't know how many times in all these movies. So we end up going on and having Mike being at home, of course, with his arm injury, his arm in a sling. I think this isn't the only movie where his arm isn't exactly or hasn't been in a sling at some point. So we go on and have, of course, Mike's dad, Clay, with the family. And Clay is mentioning that he wants to go and have an RV, and that he's tempted to just kind of go on a road trip. And they're like, well, so we're never going to see you? And he's like, no, you'll see me a lot. And so he's like, well, hey, like, you can always just live with us. Like, you don't have to go to an RV and whatever. But I think Clay just needs his own little space. And so that's what he's kind of going and talking about here about this whole RV business. So we go on and have at some point where Lee is going and talking to Clay here and is saying like, well, hey, uh, like make sure that you're like gonna be in our lives kind of thing. And Clay's like, okay, I'll do that. I'll do so. So because if anything, Clay is to break down to Lee that he greatly regrets like just leaving his wife and his son is his greatest regret. So, like, it'll be interesting to see like how Clay is to have supposedly been active with his family and so on and so forth. So, but yeah. So with that said, I think that's really a bulk of what this movie is. Like, there's some little tiny details where I didn't go further in and whatever, but that's to be the real legitimate end to this movie is just kind of Mike spending some time with his family, and that's about it. So with that said, I think I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.